The ammonia burned my nostrils as I scrubbed the marble floor of the Rossetti Mansion's grand foyer, my knees aching against the cold stone despite the foam pad I'd learned to bring from home. 2 a.m, and the house was finally silent, the weight of its secrets settling like dust in the corners I'd been hired to make disappear. I'd been working here for 6 weeks now, ever since the hospital terminated my nursing license. Whistleblower, they'd called it in the official documentation, though the administrator who'd escorted me out had used far less diplomatic language. Reporting a surgeon's negligence that cost a patient her life apparently made me a problem, not a professional. Now I cleaned the floors of criminals instead of saving lives in sterile corridors, and somehow the irony felt heavier than the industrial mop bucket I pushed from room to room. The Rossetti Mansion was everything my tiny apartment wasn't. Vast, pristine, draped in the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Persian rugs worth more than my yearly salary. Paintings I recognized from art history classes I'd taken a lifetime ago. Furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. And bloodstains, though those were rarer than one might expect from a family rumored to control half the city's underground operations. Tonight's mess was in the library, a room I usually avoided because something about the leather-bound books and mahogany shelves made my chest tight with memories of the person I used to be. Before Marcus, before everything shattered, I adjusted my cleaning cart, wincing as the movement pulled at the bruises on my ribs. 3 days old now, turning from purple to that sickly yellow-green that meant they were healing. Marcus had been particularly angry last time, showing up drunk at my apartment despite the restraining order that existed only on paper. The police officer who'd responded to my neighbor's call had been one of his buddies from the precinct, more interested in buying me coffee and explaining how stressed Marcus had been at work than in actually enforcing the order. "Just give him some space," Officer Davidson had said, his smile too familiar, too knowing. "These things work themselves out if people are reasonable." Reasonable, as if the reasonable response to your ex-husband breaking your ribs was to simply wait for him to calm down. I pushed the cart toward the library, my reflection ghosting across the darkened windows that lined the hallway. 28 years old, and I looked 40, exhaustion carved into every line of my face. My dark hair, once thick and shining, hung limp in a ponytail. The purple crescents under my eyes had become permanent fixtures, souvenirs from the nights I spent lying awake, listening for Marcus's car in the parking lot below. The library door was ajar, which was unusual. The Rossetti family kept most rooms locked when not in use, a security measure that made my job easier since I only cleaned accessible areas. But tonight, a sliver of amber light spilled into the hallway, and as I approached, I caught the copper scent of blood beneath the lemon polish I'd been using. My nursing instincts kicked in before my common sense could stop me. I pushed the door open wider, my eyes immediately scanning for the source of the smell, the potential severity of injury. Adrian Rossetti sat in one of the leather wingback chairs, his white shirt torn and stained crimson across his shoulder and torso. His jacket lay discarded on the floor beside him, along with what looked like a first aid kit, its contents scattered as if he'd tried and failed to tend to himself. His face was pale, jaw tight with controlled pain, and when his eyes met mine, I saw surprise flash through them before the cold mask slammed back into place. "Get out." His voice was rough, commanding despite the obvious weakness in his body. But I was already moving toward him, my hands already assessing the damage with the clinical detachment I'd perfected in the ER. Gunshot wound, my mind catalogued automatically. Entry point in the left shoulder. Exit wound visible through the tear in his shirt. Bleeding controlled but not stopped. No arterial spray, so nothing immediately life-threatening. But the amount of blood on the floor suggested he'd been sitting here for at least 20 minutes. "You need a hospital," I said, kneeling beside the chair and reaching for the first aid supplies he'd attempted to use. "I need you to leave." He tried to shift away from me, but the movement made him hiss through his teeth, fresh blood seeping through his makeshift bandage. I looked up at him, meeting those storm-gray eyes that I'd only glimpsed from a distance during my brief encounters with the family. Adrian Rossetti was the eldest son, the one everyone whispered about in tones that mixed fear with reluctant respect. He ran the family's operations with ruthless efficiency, or so the rumors claimed. Up close, even wounded and vulnerable, he radiated the kind of authority that made people instinctively obey. But I'd spent too many years in emergency rooms to be intimidated by powerful men bleeding all over expensive furniture. "You're going into shock," I told him, already pressing clean gauze against the wound. "Your hands are trembling, your pupils are dilated, and you've lost at least a pint of blood judging by what's on this floor. So you can either let me help you, or you can pass out and I'll call an ambulance anyway." Something flickered in his expression. Not anger, but a calculating assessment that made me suddenly aware of how alone we were, how vulnerable I'd made myself by walking into this room. This man could make me disappear with a phone call, could have me killed and buried where no one would ever find my body. "You're not afraid." He said it like an observation, not a question. "I'm terrified," I admitted, because lying seemed pointless when my hands were already stained with his blood. "But you're injured, and I'm a nurse. Was a nurse. So unless you plan to shoot me with whatever gun made this hole in your shoulder, I'm going to stop the bleeding and figure out if that bullet did any permanent damage." For a long moment, he just stared at me, his breathing shallow and controlled. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. I worked quickly, my training taking over as I cut away the ruined shirt and properly assessed the wound. Through and through, clean exit, no major vessels compromised. He'd been lucky, or maybe just experienced enough to know how to take a bullet without dying from it. The thought should have disturbed me more than it did. "This needs stitches," I said, cleaning the wound with antiseptic that made his jaw tighten further. "And antibiotics. You're at high risk for infection." "Can you do it?" His voice had steadied slightly, some color returning to his face now that the bleeding was under control. I hesitated. Treating him here, like this, was a dozen kinds of illegal. I didn't have a license anymore. Didn't have the right supplies or the proper setting. But the alternative was letting him go to a hospital where questions would be asked, records would be made, and someone like Marcus would have access to information that could be used as leverage. And if I refused, what would Adrian Rossetti do with the cleaning woman who'd seen too much? "I can do it," I heard myself say, "but I need better supplies than this." I gestured at the scattered first aid kit. Sutures, local anesthetic, proper surgical tools. He reached for his phone with his uninjured arm, typed something one-handed, then set it aside. 15 minutes, he said. "My doctor will have everything sent over." Of course he had a doctor on call at 2 a.m. Of course he could summon medical supplies in the middle of the night without raising questions. This was his world, where money and power smoothed over every impossibility. While we waited, I kept pressure on the wound and tried not to think about how warm his blood felt through the gauze, how the scent of his cologne, something woody and expensive, mixed with copper and antiseptic. Tried not to notice the way his eyes tracked my movements with unsettling intensity, as if he were memorizing every detail of my face. "You work nights," he said finally, breaking the heavy silence. "Less chance of running into family members," I replied, focusing on the bandage. "I'm just the cleaning woman. Better if I stay invisible." Yet here you are. "Here I am," I agreed, not sure if it was a statement or an accusation. His gaze dropped to my wrists, where my sleeves had ridden up to reveal the finger-shaped bruises that circled like dark bracelets. I saw the moment he registered them, saw his expression harden in a way that made the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "Who?" The single word was soft, deadly. I pulled my sleeves down quickly, heat flooding my face. "It's nothing," I'm clumsy, that's all. Hit my arm on the cleaning cart. Those are hand marks, not a question. An observation delivered in a tone that suggested he'd seen enough violence to recognize its signatures. And they're recent. 3, maybe 4 days old. My throat closed up. I'd gotten so good at hiding the bruises, at explaining away the evidence, at making myself small and unnoticeable so no one would look too closely. But Adrian Rossetti looked at everything too closely. It was probably what kept him alive in his line of work. It's handled, I said, which was a lie. Nothing about Marcus was handled. Before Adrian could respond, a soft knock at the library door announced the arrival of his supplies. A man in his 60s entered, carrying a leather medical bag that looked like it had been used for this exact purpose many times before. He took in the scene without visible surprise, his expression professionally neutral, as he set the bag on the side table. "Mr. Rossetti?" he greeted, then turned to me. "And you are?" "Ava," Adrian answered before I could. "She's going to stitch me up, show her what she needs." The doctor, whose name I never learned, opened the bag and walked me through its contents with the efficiency of someone who'd done this briefing before. Sutures, local anesthetic, surgical scissors, everything I'd requested and more. He asked no questions about my qualifications, made no comments about the irregularity of the situation, simply provided the tools and stepped back. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," he told Adrian, then disappeared as quietly as he'd arrived. I numbed the area around the wound, my hands steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. Adrian watched me work, his breathing evening out as the anesthetic took effect, but that unsettling intensity never left his eyes. "You have good hands," he observed as I began the first suture. Steady, confident. 6 years in emergency medicine, I said, focusing on the neat, even stitches I'd done thousands of times before. "You learned to work under pressure. Why nights? Why cleaning?" The questions were casual, but I sensed genuine curiosity beneath them. I could have lied, should have lied, but something about the intimacy of the moment, about having my hands literally inside this dangerous man's flesh, made pretense feel pointless. "I reported a surgeon for negligence. Patient died because he came to work drunk and botched a routine procedure. The hospital buried it, destroyed my career as punishment for making noise." I tied off another suture. Turns out whistleblowers don't get good references. "And the bruises?" He nodded toward my wrists. "Are those from the hospital too?" My hands faltered for just a second before I forced them steady again. "Ex-husband. He's a police officer. Apparently that makes restraining orders more like suggestions." The silence that followed was different than before, heavier, more dangerous. When I dared glance at Adrian's face, I saw something cold and calculating in his expression, the look of a man doing complex mental arithmetic with other people's lives. "Name," he said softly. "Why?" "Because I'm going to remember it." The promise in those words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. Or maybe it did. But fear mixed with something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely. "Marcus Chen," I said, surprising myself. "Officer Marcus Chen, Precinct 12. Adrian's slight nod was the only indication he'd heard me. I finished the stitches in silence, applied antibiotic ointment, and wrapped his shoulder in clean bandages with the efficiency of someone who'd done this procedure hundreds of times. When I finally stepped back to assess my work, I was satisfied to see that the bleeding had stopped completely, the stitches were even and tight, and he'd regained the color in his face. "You should rest," I told him, packing up the supplies. "Keep the wound dry, change the dressing twice daily, and watch for signs of infection. And for God's sake, avoid getting shot again for at least 6 weeks. The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. "I'll try to remember that." I stood, suddenly aware of how my knees ached from kneeling on the floor, how my ribs throbbed from the awkward position I'd held while working. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last hour was fading fast, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion that had become my default state. "I should finish cleaning," I said, looking at the blood-stained floor, the scattered medical supplies, the evidence of violence that would need to disappear before morning. "Leave it." Adrian's command was quiet, but absolute. "Marco will handle it. You're done for tonight." I wanted to argue that this was my job, that I needed the money, that walking away from a mess felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. But my body was screaming for rest, and the thought of my narrow bed in my tiny apartment suddenly seemed like the most appealing thing in the world. "Okay," I agreed, gathering my cleaning cart. I was almost at the door when his voice stopped me. "Ava." I turned, finding him still seated but somehow more commanding than before, despite the bandages and the pallor that still clung to his features. "Thank you," he said, and something in the way he said it made those two simple words feel weighted with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. "You're welcome," I replied, and left before I could say anything else, before I could acknowledge the way my heart was racing, or the strange sense that something fundamental had just shifted in the careful balance of my life. I took the service elevator down to the staff area, changed out of my blood-stained uniform, and signed out with the night security guard who barely glanced up from his phone. The city was quiet as I waited for my bus, the kind of deep silence that only exists in the hours before dawn, when even the criminals have gone home to sleep. My phone buzzed as the bus pulled up. A text from an unknown number. "Make sure you eat something. Blood loss makes people forget to care for themselves." I'm assuming the same applies to those who treat it. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Adrian Rossetti had my number, had somehow gotten it in the brief time between my leaving his library and my reaching the bus stop. The implications of that should have terrified me, but instead I felt something else. Something dangerously close to gratitude for someone noticing I existed beyond my utility. I didn't respond. Didn't know what I would say even if I wanted to. Just pocketed my phone and watched the city blur past the bus windows as it carried me toward home, toward the apartment where I'd lie awake listening for Marcus's car, toward another day of pretending I was fine when everything inside me was broken. But as I finally crawled into bed, just as the sun was beginning to rise, I couldn't stop thinking about storm-gray eyes that had looked at my bruises and asked, "Who?" in a voice that promised retribution. Couldn't stop wondering what it meant that Adrian Rossetti had remembered my name, had thanked me, had texted to make sure I was taking care of myself. Couldn't stop feeling like I'd just stepped across some invisible line, and there was no going back to the careful invisibility I'd cultivated. I fell asleep finally, my last conscious thought, a whispered prayer, that I hadn't just made the worst mistake of my life, by allowing Adrian Rossetti to see me as something more than the cleaning woman who scrubbed away the evidence of his violent world. Morning came too soon, dragging me from restless sleep with the insistent buzz of my alarm. I'd managed maybe 3 hours, interrupted by dreams of blood on marble floors and gray eyes that followed me through shadowed corridors. My ribs ached as I sat up, a sharp reminder of Marcus's last visit, and for a moment, I just sat on the edge of my bed, trying to summon the energy to face another day. The apartment was silent, except for the muffled sounds of my neighbors starting their morning routines. Mrs. Chen in 3B was running her vacuum cleaner. The college students in 3C were arguing about someone's turn to buy milk. Normal sounds, safe sounds. The soundtrack of a life that didn't involve treating gunshot wounds at 2 a.m. I checked my phone out of habit, scrolling past the usual notifications until I reached last night's text from Adrian. "Make sure you eat something." I'd fallen asleep without responding, without even fixing myself the sandwich I'd planned to make. My stomach growled now, empty and acidic, but the thought of food made me nauseous. The bruises on my wrists had darkened overnight, the purple deepening to almost black in some places. I traced them absently, remembering Marcus's grip, the way he'd squeezed until I'd cried out, until he'd gotten whatever satisfaction he'd been seeking from my pain. Officer Davidson had been right about one thing. Marcus was stressed. The corruption investigation into Precinct 12 was making everyone nervous, and Marcus had always channeled his anxiety into his fists. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, but the message made my blood run cold. I know you've been talking to someone. We need to meet. Tonight. Usual place. Don't make me come find you. Marcus. Of course. He always knew somehow. Always sensed when I was pulling away or finding strength I wasn't supposed to have. I'd learned not to question how he tracked me, how he seemed to know my movements before I made them. Cops had resources. Cops had friends who looked the other way while they violated restraining orders and terrorized their ex-wives. I deleted the message, my hands shaking. The usual place was the parking lot behind the Chinese restaurant where we used to get takeout, back when I still believed he could change, back when I still thought love was supposed to hurt like this. I wouldn't go. Couldn't go. But Marcus didn't take no for an answer, and my refusal would only make the next encounter worse. The bathroom mirror showed me what 3 hours of sleep and 6 years of systematic destruction looked like. I'd been pretty once, or at least that's what people had told me. Now I just looked tired, hollowed out, a ghost wearing the skin of someone who used to have dreams beyond survival. I showered quickly, letting the hot water soothe my aching muscles, then dressed in my day uniform. Jeans, a long-sleeved shirt despite the warmth, sneakers that let me move fast if I needed to. The bruises were hidden, the exhaustion masked behind makeup I'd gotten too skilled at applying. Invisible again, the way I needed to be. The Rossetti mansion looked different in daylight, less imposing but somehow more real. I arrived through the service entrance as always, signing in with the day security guard who actually looked at me this time, his expression curious. "Heard you helped Mr. Adrian last night," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "That true?" Word traveled fast in this house. I should have expected that. "He was injured," I said carefully. "I have medical training." It seemed like the right thing to do. The guard nodded slowly, as if my answer had confirmed something. "Right thing," he echoed. "Yeah, just be careful, okay? The family appreciates loyalty, but they also remember everything. Every favor, every debt, every person who sees too much." The warning was clear, even if the threat behind it remained unspoken. I'd crossed into territory where the rules were different, where helping someone could be as dangerous as hurting them. I spent the morning in the East Wing, far from the library where I'd left Adrian last night. The work was mindless, meditative almost. Dust, polish, vacuum, move to the next room. My body knew the routine so well I could let my mind wander, though wandering meant circling back to the same questions over and over. Would Marcus really come looking for me if I didn't show up tonight? Would he make good on his threats? And what did it mean that Adrian Rossetti had my number, had texted me, had looked at my bruises with that cold, calculating expression that promised something I didn't dare name? Ava. The voice made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I spun to find Adrian standing in the doorway of the sitting room I'd been cleaning. He wore a dark shirt that concealed the bandages on his shoulder, his hair damp as if he'd recently showered, and he moved with careful precision that suggested the wound hurt more than he was letting on. "Mr. Rossetti," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "You should be resting. I've rested enough." He stepped into the room, and I was suddenly aware of how we were alone, how the rest of the house felt miles away despite being just down the hall. "How are your ribs?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm sorry?" "You winced last night when you knelt to treat my shoulder, and again when you stood, broken or bruised." I should have lied, should have deflected, but something about the directness of his question, the way he looked at me like he could see through any excuse I might offer, made me tell the truth. Bruised. He cracked them before, a few months ago, but they healed. This time he was more controlled. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something in the air around him shifted, went cold and still like the moment before a storm breaks. Controlled, he repeated softly. Interesting word choice. He's a police officer, I found myself explaining, though I wasn't sure why I felt the need to. He knows exactly how hard to hit to leave marks that fade, how to hurt without leaving evidence that lasts. And the restraining order? Exists on paper, doesn't exist anywhere else that matters. Adrian moved closer, and I fought the instinct to step back, to make myself smaller. He stopped just within arm's reach, his presence overwhelming in a way that had nothing to do with physical intimidation, and everything to do with the raw authority he carried like a second skin. "The supplies I gave you last night," he said. "The medical bag, keep it. I can't. You can. You will. Not a request. And if you need more supplies, if you need anything, you'll tell me." I stared at him, trying to understand what was happening, what this was. Gratitude for treating his wound? Or something more complicated, more dangerous? Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Because you helped me without hesitation. Because you could have run, could have called someone, could have done a dozen things that would have made your life easier and mine more complicated, but you didn't. He paused. And because no one should have to hide bruises under long sleeves in summer. The unexpected gentleness in his voice made my throat tight. I'd grown so accustomed to cruelty, to indifference, that simple kindness felt disorienting, almost painful. "I should get back to work," I said, because I didn't know what else to say, how else to respond to this man who'd somehow seen me when I'd spent months perfecting the art of being invisible. "Of course." He stepped back, giving me space. "But Ava, the offer stands. Whatever you need." He left before I could respond, his footsteps fading down the hallway. And I stood alone in the sitting room, my heart racing and my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers for. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks and mounting anxiety. 5 o'clock came, then 6. The time Marcus had set for our meeting creeping closer with each passing minute. I could ignore it, could pretend I'd never seen the message. But that would only delay the inevitable, and delayed consequences with Marcus were always worse. At 7:30, I clocked out and took the bus toward the Chinese restaurant, my stomach churning with dread. The parking lot was dark when I arrived, only a few cars scattered across the cracked asphalt. Marcus's truck was parked in the far corner, and I could see his silhouette in the driver's seat, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I'd learned that running only made him angrier, more determined. So I walked across the parking lot on legs that felt like water, each step an act of will. I was 10 feet from his truck when another car pulled up, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. It stopped between me and Marcus, blocking his view, and the rear door opened. "Get in," Adrian's voice, calm and commanding from inside the car. I hesitated, looking between the sedan and Marcus's truck, torn between two types of danger. Then Marcus's door opened, and the decision was made. I slid into the sedan, and it pulled away before Marcus could reach us, his shouts of rage fading as we accelerated onto the main road. "What are you doing?" I demanded, finally finding my voice. "How did you even know I was here?" Adrian sat beside me in the back seat, his expression unreadable in the dim interior light. "I've been having you followed since last night. For your safety." "You've been what?" Anger flared hot and sudden, cutting through my fear. "You have no right." "I have every right when it comes to protecting people under my roof." His voice remained calm, reasonable, which somehow made it worse. "You work for me. That makes you my responsibility." "I'm not your responsibility. I'm not anyone's. I'm just..." being stalked by a dirty cop who uses his badge to terrorize you. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me I'm wrong. I wouldn't, because he wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. Marcus will be furious, I said instead. He'll think I set him up. He'll do nothing. Not to you. Not anymore. The certainty in Adrian's voice should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified me, because it meant Adrian Rossetti had decided I was his concern. And I knew enough about powerful men to understand that being someone's concern could be its own kind of cage. Where are you taking me? I asked quietly. Somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't find you tonight. And despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion and the anger, I felt something inside me uncoil just slightly. Exhaustion rushed in to fill the space that constant vigilance had occupied. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to close my eyes and breathe without listening for footsteps, without bracing for pain. The car carried us through the city, away from everything familiar, towards something unknown and potentially dangerous. But for tonight, for this moment, unknown felt like mercy, and Adrian Rossetti's protection felt less like a cage than the first real shelter I'd had in longer than I could remember. The safe house wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured something sparse and industrial, all bare concrete and utilitarian furniture. Instead, the car pulled up to a brownstone in a quiet residential neighborhood, the kind of place where young professionals lived and argued about parking spaces, where children played in postage stamp yards behind wrought iron fences. This is yours? I asked as Adrian helped me out of the car, his hand at my elbow more steadying than restraining. One of several properties. This one isn't connected to the family in any obvious way. He guided me up the steps to the front door, which he unlocked with a key from his pocket. No one will look for you here. The interior was surprisingly warm. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, furniture that looked lived in rather than staged. A kitchen with granite counters opened onto a living room, with built-in bookshelves and a fireplace. Through an archway, I glimpsed a bedroom with a queen-sized bed covered in a thick duvet that looked impossibly soft. There's food in the kitchen, clothes in the bedroom closet that should fit you more or less. Adrian moved to the windows, checking the locks with practiced efficiency. The doors and windows have sensors. If anyone tries to come in, I'll know immediately. You're safe here, Ava. Safe. The word felt foreign, like trying on a coat that belonged to someone else. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly safe, the last time I'd gone to sleep without fear as my constant companion. For how long? I asked, setting down the small bag I'd grabbed from my locker at work, the one that contained a change of clothes and the few possessions I kept with me at all times, just in case. As long as necessary. He turned from the windows to face me, and in the warm lamplight, I could see the shadow of pain in his expression, the way he held his injured shoulder slightly higher than the other. Until we figure out a more permanent solution to your Marcus problem. We? I echoed. There is no we. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you stitched up my shoulder instead of calling the police. His voice was calm, matter of fact. Actions have consequences, Ava. Sometimes the consequence is that people feel obligated to return the favor. I wanted to argue, to insist I hadn't asked for his protection, hadn't wanted to be pulled into whatever this was. But exhaustion was winning, dragging me under like a riptide, and the bedroom through that archway called to me with its promise of actual rest. Why do you even care? The question came out smaller than I'd intended, vulnerable in a way that made me want to take it back immediately. Adrian studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Because I understand what it's like to be trapped by someone else's violence. Because you didn't hesitate to help me when you had every reason to walk away. And because... He paused, something shifting in his eyes. Because you deserve better than hiding bruises and jumping at shadows. The simple statement, delivered without pity or judgment, hit me harder than Marcus's fists ever had. I felt my carefully constructed walls cracking, felt tears burning behind my eyes that I refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of this dangerous stranger who'd somehow decided I was worth protecting. "You should check your stitches," I said instead, deflecting the emotion I couldn't process. "Make sure there's no infection starting." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always the nurse." "Was the nurse," I corrected automatically. "No." He shook his head slightly. "You'll always be the nurse, Ava. That's not something a piece of paper can take away from you." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. "I need to handle something. Make yourself comfortable. There's a number by the phone. Direct line to me. Use it if you need anything." He left before I could thank him, the door closing softly behind him, and I was alone in this borrowed sanctuary, this temporary respite from the chaos my life had become. I explored the space like a guilty trespasser, half expecting someone to burst in and demand to know what I thought I was doing here. The kitchen was fully stocked, including herbal tea and the kind of crackers that settle nervous stomachs. The bathroom had thick towels and expensive soap that smelled like lavender and sage. And the bedroom closet did indeed contain women's clothing in approximately my size, ranging from casual jeans and sweaters to elegant dresses that looked like they'd never been worn. I showered, letting the hot water run longer than I should have, washing away the residue of fear and Marcus's parking lot and the strange, overwhelming events of the past 24 hours. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that was softer than any I'd ever owned, I found food on the kitchen counter. Soup still steaming in a ceramic bowl, fresh bread, a note in Adrian's precise handwriting. "Eat. Rest. Don't think too hard about tomorrow. Just be here. Now. Safe." I ate the soup standing at the counter, too restless to sit, too anxious to fully relax despite the comfort surrounding me. My phone sat on the counter beside the bowl, and as I ate, it buzzed repeatedly. Marcus, no doubt, furious at being stood up, at the mysterious car that had taken me away from him. I turned it off without reading the messages, unwilling to let his anger poison this brief moment of peace. The bed was as soft as it looked, the sheets cool and clean against my skin. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this neighborhood, the absence of my usual background noise of traffic and shouting neighbors, and for the first time in months, possibly years, I let myself cry. For the career I'd lost, for the woman I used to be, for the bone-deep exhaustion of being afraid all the time. Sleep came eventually, heavy and dreamless, and when I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows, I had to orient myself for several confused moments before remembering where I was, how I'd gotten here. My phone, when I turned it on, showed 37 missed calls and too many texts to count, all from Marcus. I scrolled through them with clinical detachment, cataloging the progression from anger to threats to something that might have been concern if I didn't know better. "Where are you? This isn't funny. You're making a mistake. I know someone took you. Tell me who. I can protect you better than anyone else. You need to come home. I'm sorry about last time. You know I don't mean it." The last one almost made me laugh. Almost. Because Marcus was sorry, in his own way. Sorry he'd hurt me badly enough that I might actually leave for good. Sorry his control was slipping. But never sorry enough to stop, to change, to be the man he'd pretended to be when we first met. A knock at the door made me jump, my heart racing before I heard Adrian's voice. "It's me." I wrapped myself in one of the robes I'd found in the closet and opened the door to find him standing there with coffee and a bag from a bakery I recognized from my old neighborhood, the one I used to walk past every morning on my way to the hospital. "How did you know?" I asked, accepting the coffee that smelled exactly how I liked it, strong, with just a splash of cream. "I pay attention." He set the bakery bag on the counter. Blueberry muffins, if I remember correctly. You used to buy one every Thursday before your shift. The realization that he'd known me before last night, that he'd somehow noticed me during my invisible existence as his cleaning woman, sent a strange chill through me. Not fear, exactly. Something more complicated. You're being followed around the clock now, he continued, pouring himself coffee from the second cup he'd brought. Discreet surveillance, but comprehensive. Marcus can't get to you without me knowing about it first. That's a lot of resources for someone who just cleans your floors. You're more than that. He met my gaze steadily. You became more than that the moment you chose to help me instead of protecting yourself. I wanted to argue. To insist that helping him had been instinct, not choice, certainly not some kind of binding agreement. But the truth was more complicated, wasn't it? I had chosen, had seen a man bleeding, and decided his life mattered more than my safety, my anonymity, my carefully maintained invisibility. Marcus knows someone has me, I said, showing him some of the texts. He's going to dig. He's going to find out it was you. Let him. Adrian's voice held no concern, only cold certainty. Let him come looking. I have plenty to say to Officer Marcus Chen. The way he said it, so calm and final, made me understand with sudden clarity that Adrian didn't just intend to protect me from Marcus. He intended to eliminate Marcus as a threat entirely. And in Adrian's world, elimination might very well be literal. Don't. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Whatever you're thinking, don't. Marcus is violent and cruel and corrupt, but he's still a person. Still someone's son, someone's colleague. I won't have more blood on my hands because of him. Adrian studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You have blood on your hands? The question was too perceptive, too close to the wound I kept bandaged deep inside. The patient who died because of that surgeon's negligence? She was only 32, had a daughter. I knew he was impaired, knew he shouldn't be operating, but I didn't say anything until it was too late. Until she was bleeding out on the table and there was nothing anyone could do. So yes, I have blood on my hands, and I won't add more. You reported him after, Adrian said softly. You cost yourself everything to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. That's not having blood on your hands, Ava. That's trying to wash it off. The gentleness in his voice threatened to undo me completely. I set down my coffee with shaking hands, wrapping my arms around myself in an instinctive gesture of protection. I need to call work, I said, changing the subject because I couldn't handle the weight of his understanding. Tell them I'm sick. I can't afford to lose this job. Already handled. I called in a personal favor. You're on paid leave for the next 2 weeks. Family emergency. He hesitated, which gives us time to figure out a more permanent solution. Us, I repeated. That word again, the one that implied partnership, where none should exist. There is no us, Adrian. You're doing this out of some sense of obligation. But I can't, I won't, let you upend your life for mine. Too late. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the dark stubble along his jaw, notice the way his left shoulder remained slightly elevated to protect the wound I'd stitched. I've already made the decision, Ava. The only question now is whether you're going to keep fighting me on it. I wanted to fight, wanted to assert my independence, my capability, all the armor I'd built around myself over years of being knocked down and getting back up. But I was so tired of fighting, so exhausted from being strong all the time, and the offer of help, of protection, of someone else carrying the weight for just a little while, was almost irresistibly tempting. What do you want from me? I asked quietly. No one does this out of pure altruism, so what's the price? The price, he said, his voice low and intense, is that you stop trying to disappear. Stop making yourself small and invisible. Let yourself be seen, be angry, be whatever you need to be without apologizing for taking up space in the world. That's not a price, I whispered. That's impossible. Then we'll work on possible. He reached out, his fingers gentle as they lifted my chin so I had to meet his eyes. Starting now. Starting with you eating that muffin and drinking your coffee without checking over your shoulder every 30 seconds. Starting with you sleeping without wondering if Marcus will break down the door. Starting with you existing without permission. His touch was careful, respectful. Nothing like Marcus's grabbing hands, but it still made me catch my breath, still sent a spike of something through me that might have been fear, or might have been something far more dangerous. I don't know how to do that, I admitted, the truth raw and vulnerable. I know, Adrian said, but I'm a patient teacher. He left me then, giving me space to process, to eat, to exist in this temporary sanctuary without his overwhelming presence. But as I sat at the kitchen counter eating my blueberry muffin and watching the sunlight stream through the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed another line, stepped deeper into Adrian Rossetti's world, and with every step I took, the path back to my old life, my old self, grew more impossible to find. My phone buzzed again. Not Marcus this time, but an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept the call. Ava Chen? A woman's voice, professional and crisp. Reyes, I corrected automatically. I went back to my maiden name. Who is this? Detective Claire Morrison, Internal Affairs. I need to speak with you about Officer Marcus Chen. It's urgent. And just like that, the sanctuary walls started crumbling again. I stared at my phone for several heartbeats after Detective Morrison ended the call, her words echoing in my mind with the weight of inevitability. Internal Affairs. The investigation I'd heard whispers about, the one that had Marcus spiraling into increasingly violent panic, had finally come knocking at my door. Or rather, at Adrian Rossetti's door, since that's where I was hiding. I needed to tell Adrian, needed to warn him that the police, legitimate police this time, were asking questions about Marcus, and by extension about me. But something held me back. Some instinct that involving Adrian further in my mess would only make everything worse, more complicated, more dangerous for everyone. Detective Morrison wanted to meet today. Neutral location, she'd said, just to ask some questions about Marcus's behavior. Nothing formal. But I'd seen enough police procedurals to know that nothing formal was how they got you comfortable before the hammer fell. I was still sitting at the kitchen counter, my half-eaten muffin forgotten, when Adrian returned. He took one look at my face and his expression shifted, becoming sharp and focused in a way that reminded me exactly who he was, what he was capable of. What happened? Not a question, a demand. Internal Affairs called. They want to talk to me about Marcus. Adrian crossed to me in 3 strides, his hands gentle as they took my phone, scrolling through the call log with practiced efficiency. Detective Claire Morrison, he read. She's legitimate. One of the few clean cops in this city. How do you... I started to ask, then stopped. Of course he knew. Men like Adrian made it their business to know which police officers could be bought and which couldn't, which ones were threats and which were merely obstacles. When does she want to meet? He asked, handing back my phone. This afternoon, 2 o'clock at a coffee shop in the financial district. You're going. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I have to. If I don't show up, they'll just find another way to get to me. And I don't want them coming here, connecting you to any of this. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or respect for the logic. You'll go, he agreed, but not alone, and not without preparation. He spent the next hour coaching me through what to say, what not to say, how to read Detective Morrison's questions for the real information she was seeking. It was like getting a masterclass in verbal self-defense from someone who'd clearly danced this particular dance many times before. They're building a case against Marcus, he explained, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Probably started with the corruption investigation at his precinct, and branched out when they saw his behavior patterns. They need witnesses, preferably ones with documentation of his abuse. I don't have documentation, I said quietly. I have bruises that fade and memories that no one believes. You have medical training. You know what to look for, how to describe injuries in clinical terms that carry weight. Use that. He leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on me. And Ava, don't protect him. Not now, not when they're finally paying attention. The drive to the financial district took 30 minutes, Adrian's driver navigating through midday traffic with the kind of efficiency that suggested he'd done high-speed chases before. Adrian sat beside me in the back seat, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, far enough that I didn't feel crowded. She might ask about me, he said, as we approached the coffee shop, about how you went from your apartment to a safe house in less than 24 hours. What will you tell her? The truth, I replied. That my employer noticed I was in danger and offered me somewhere safe to stay. Your employer. He smiled slightly. Is that what I am? Isn't it? His gaze held mine. We'll see. The coffee shop was exactly the kind of place where no one paid attention to anyone else. Busy, noisy, full of professionals on their lunch breaks tapping away at laptops. Detective Morrison was already seated at a corner table, her back to the wall in a position that let her watch both entrances. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie there was and learned to spot them from 50 feet away. Ms. Reyes, she greeted as I approached, standing to shake my hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. I slid into the chair across from her, hyper-aware of Adrian's presence, even though he'd remained in the car, trusting me to handle this alone. Or testing me. I wasn't sure which. What's this about? I asked, even though I knew. Marcus Chen, your ex-husband. She pulled out a tablet, swiping through what looked like case files. How long have you been separated? Officially, 8 months. Unofficially, he's never accepted that we're done. Can you elaborate on that? This was it. The moment where I could finally tell someone who might actually have the power to do something about Marcus, who might believe me instead of explaining away his violence as stress or miscommunication, or my own oversensitivity. So I told her everything. The escalating abuse during our marriage, the way he used his badge to intimidate me, the restraining order that existed only on paper, the friendly officers who responded to my calls, and somehow always concluded nothing was wrong. I described the bruises in clinical detail, the broken ribs, the fear that had become my constant companion. Detective Morrison listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally but mostly just letting me talk, unspooling the story I'd kept locked away for so long. Why didn't you document any of this? She asked when I finally ran out of words. Photographs, medical records, anything that could substantiate your claims. Because I was afraid. The simple truth. Because Marcus told me what happens to people who cross him. Because every time I tried to report something, his friends in the department made it clear that no one would believe me over a decorated officer. She nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she already suspected. Ms. Reyes, I need to ask you about the past 48 hours. According to Marcus's statement, you were supposed to meet him 2 nights ago but never showed up. He claims you've been abducted. Abducted, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Is that what he's calling it? He's made an official missing persons report. Filed it yesterday morning after you didn't show up for work." She paused. "But you're clearly not missing. So where have you been?" This was the dangerous question, the one Adrian had warned me about. The one that could drag him into an investigation he definitely didn't want to be part of. My employer noticed I was in danger and offered me a safe place to stay. That's all. Your employer. Detective Morrison's gaze sharpened. And who would that be? Does it matter? I'm an adult. I'm not missing. I'm choosing not to go home because my violent ex-husband knows where I live. It matters, she said carefully. If the person providing your safe house has their own history with law enforcement, it matters if you've gone from one dangerous situation to another. She knew. Somehow, she'd already figured out my connection to the Rossetti family. Maybe she'd seen the security footage from the mansion. Maybe she had sources inside the organization. Either way, lying would only make things worse. Adrian Rossetti offered me a place to stay after he became aware of my situation, I said, keeping my voice steady. He hasn't asked me for anything in return, hasn't threatened me or coerced me. He's simply providing a service to someone in need. Adrian Rossetti doesn't do anything without expecting something in return, Detective Morrison said bluntly. You understand that, right? Whatever his reasons for helping you, they serve his interests somehow. Maybe, I acknowledged. But right now his interests align with me staying alive and unharmed, which is more than I can say for the police department that's employed Marcus for 8 years without once questioning his behavior. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, edged with years of frustration and fear. Detective Morrison didn't flinch, just nodded as if I'd made a valid point. You're angry, she observed. You have every right to be. The system failed you, Ms. Reyes, multiple times. I'm trying to correct that failure, but I need your cooperation. What kind of cooperation? Testimony, on record. About Marcus's abuse, about the corruption you've witnessed in how his colleagues handled your complaints. We're building a case that goes beyond just him, looking at the whole culture of protection and retaliation at Precinct 12. My hands started shaking. I pressed them flat against the table, willing them to stop. If I testify, Marcus will know. He'll find out, and He's currently on administrative leave, pending the outcome of our investigation. His badge and gun have been confiscated. He can't hurt you, Ms. Reyes. But she didn't understand. Marcus didn't need a badge to hurt me. He had friends, connections, people who owed him favors. And now, if I testified against him, I'd be painting a target on my back that no safe house could fully protect. I need time, I said finally, to think about this, to understand what I'd be getting into. Detective Morrison pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. Take all the time you need. But Ms. Reyes, the longer you wait, the more opportunities Marcus has to influence witnesses, destroy evidence, or worse. The window for justice is always smaller than we'd like. She left before I could respond, disappearing into the lunch crowd with practiced efficiency. I sat there for several minutes, staring at her business card, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like physical force. When I finally returned to the car, Adrian took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just handed me a bottle of water and let the silence stretch between us as we drove back to the safe house. It wasn't until we were back inside, the door locked and the security system armed, that he finally spoke. What did she want? My testimony against Marcus, against the whole culture of corruption at his precinct. And what did you say? That I needed time. I collapsed onto the couch, suddenly exhausted despite having done nothing more strenuous than drink coffee and relive my worst memories. She doesn't understand what she's asking. If I testify, if I go on record, Marcus will never stop coming for me. Badge or no badge, he'll find a way. Adrian sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Then we make sure he can't. We, I said again, that word that kept appearing, binding us together in ways I didn't fully understand. Why do you keep saying we? This isn't your fight, Adrian. You've already done more than anyone could reasonably expect. You think I'm doing this out of obligation? He turned to face me fully, his expression intense. You think I'm tracking Marcus, housing you, preparing to go to war with a corrupt police officer because I feel like I owe you? Isn't that what this is? No. He reached out, his fingers gentle as they traced the fading bruise on my wrist. This is me recognizing something rare. Someone who helped me without hesitation, without asking for payment, without expecting anything in return. Someone who looked at me bleeding on my own floor and saw a person who needed help, not a criminal to be feared or a resource to be exploited. I'm a nurse, I whispered. It's what I do. You were a nurse, he corrected, echoing my earlier words back to me. Now you're someone trying to survive, and I'm offering you a way to do more than just survive, Ava. I'm offering you a way to actually live. By testifying against Marcus, by becoming a witness in a corruption investigation, that's not living, that's painting a target on my back. The target's already there. His voice was gentle, but firm. The only question is whether you let Marcus keep you running, keep you afraid, or whether you stand and fight with someone powerful enough to protect you. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Adrian Rossetti's protection was real, that his interest in me was genuine, that I wasn't trading one dangerous man for another. But trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, a weakness that had been beaten out of me over years of being let down by everyone who'd promised to keep me safe. I need to think, I said, pulling away from his touch, even though part of me wanted to lean into it, wanted to accept the comfort he was offering. This is too much, too fast. A week ago, I was invisible. Now I'm caught between internal affairs and a mafia boss and my violently obsessive ex-husband. I need time to process. Take what time you need, Adrian said, standing. But Ava, while you're processing, know this. I don't lose. When I decide something is mine to protect, I protect it. And whether you believe it yet or not, you became mine the moment you chose to help me instead of running. He left me alone then, retreating to whatever business demanded his attention, and I sat in the borrowed safety of his safe house, turning Detective Morrison's card over and over in my hands. The truth was, I wanted to testify. Wanted to see Marcus face consequences for once in his life. Wanted to stop being afraid every time I heard footsteps behind me or saw a police car on the street. But wanting something and being brave enough to reach for it were two entirely different things. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number, but the message made my blood run cold. I know where you are. I know who you're with. If you think Adrian Rossetti can protect you from me, you're more naive than I thought. Come home, Ava. This is your last warning. Marcus. Of course. He'd always found ways around every barrier I tried to put up, always had sources and connections that made privacy impossible. I showed the text to Adrian when he returned an hour later. He read it once, his expression hardening, then made a phone call in rapid Italian that I couldn't follow, but whose tone made clear someone was about to have a very bad day. He doesn't know where you are, Adrian said, after ending the call. He's fishing, trying to scare you into revealing your location, but it's time to move you anyway. Somewhere he can't triangulate even if he gets access to cell tower data. Move me where? The estate. My family's compound north of the city. Private, secure, and very difficult to assault even with police resources. The estate, where I'd be even deeper in Adrian Rossetti's world, even further from any path back to normal life. But normal life was a fantasy anyway, wasn't it? Normal life had never existed for me, just varying degrees of fear and different sources of danger. "Okay," I heard myself say. "When?" "Tonight. Pack light. Anything you need can be provided there." As I gathered the few belongings I'd brought to the safe house, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. Still exhausted, still marked by violence and fear, but something in my expression had changed. There was steel there that hadn't existed a week ago, a determination that felt both foreign and familiar, like discovering muscles I'd forgotten I had. Tomorrow I would decide about Detective Morrison, about testifying, about whether to finally stand and fight or keep running. But tonight, I would let Adrian Rossetti take me somewhere even more dangerous than where I'd been, and try to trust that this time, maybe this time, the person promising to protect me actually meant it. The car arrived as the sun was setting, painting the safe house in shades of gold and crimson that felt oddly prophetic, like watching a world burn so another could be born from its ashes. I climbed into the back seat beside Adrian, leaving behind the temporary sanctuary that had given me my first real rest in months, and tried not to think about the fact that every step deeper into his world made it harder to imagine a future that didn't somehow include him. The Rossetti estate materialized from the darkness like something from a Gothic novel. Stone walls, wrought iron gates, sprawling grounds that seemed to extend forever into the shadowed countryside. We'd driven for over an hour, leaving the city lights behind until there was nothing but dark trees and empty road, the kind of isolation that could feel like safety or like being completely cut off from the world, depending on your perspective. I couldn't decide which it felt like to me. "It's intimidating at first," Adrian said, as the gate swung open, triggered by sensors I couldn't see. "But you'll get used to it." The main house emerged from the tree line, illuminated by strategically placed lights that made the limestone facade glow against the night sky. It was enormous, 3 stories of classical architecture with wings extending to either side, and what looked like separate buildings scattered across the grounds. Not a home, an empire headquarters disguised as a residence. "How many people live here?" I asked, my voice small in the leather interior of the car. "The family maintains apartments in the main house. My parents, my younger brother Marco, my sister Elena when she's not at university. Then there's household staff, security team, maybe 30 people on the property at any given time. 30 people, 30 witnesses to whatever this situation was, whatever I was becoming by accepting Adrian's protection. The weight of it pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Adrian must have sensed my panic, because his hand found mine, warm and solid. "You're not a prisoner here, Ava. You can leave whenever you want. But while you're here, you're family. Under my family's protection. That means something in my world." Family. The word was so foreign, so impossibly distant from anything in my experience. My parents had died when I was 19, a car accident that left me suddenly alone in the world. No siblings, no close relatives, just me navigating through life with the kind of grim determination that came from having no safety net. And Marcus had isolated me so completely during our marriage that friends had fallen away one by one until I couldn't remember the last time someone had called just to check on me, to hear my voice, to care whether I was okay. The car stopped at the main entrance, where a woman in her 50s stood waiting, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her posture suggesting she'd been running this household long enough to know every secret it held. "Mrs. Castellano," Adrian greeted her as he helped me out of the car. "This is Ava Reyes. She'll be staying with us for a while." The woman's dark eyes swept over me in a single assessing glance that somehow managed to catalog everything. The cheap clothes, the exhaustion, the barely healed bruises on my wrists that my sleeves didn't quite cover. But when she spoke, her voice was warm, without judgment. "Welcome, Miss Reyes. I'm Rosa Castellano, the estate manager. Mr. Adrian has asked me to prepare the guest suite in the East Wing for you. If you need anything at all, day or night, you have only to ask." The kindness in her voice threatened to undo me completely, I managed a shaky "thank you" and followed her into the house, trying not to gawk at the grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier, the sweeping staircase that looked like it belonged in a museum. Adrian walked beside me, a steady presence as Mrs. Castellano led us through corridors that seemed to extend forever, past rooms whose purposes I could only guess at. Finally, we reached the east wing, where she opened a door to reveal a suite that was larger than my entire apartment had been. A sitting room with comfortable furniture and a fireplace. A bedroom with a 4-poster bed dressed in linens that looked impossibly soft. A bathroom with a deep soaking tub and a shower big enough for 3 people. And through French doors, a private balcony overlooking gardens I couldn't see clearly in the darkness, but could smell. Roses and jasmine and something else. Something green and alive. "I've taken the liberty of stocking the closet with some basics," Mrs. Castellano said, opening the walk-in closet to reveal clothes in my size, ranging from casual wear to elegant evening dresses. "If anything doesn't suit, we can arrange alterations or replacements." "This is too much," I whispered, overwhelmed by the luxury, the thoughtfulness, the sheer impossibility of my current situation. "It's necessity," Adrian corrected gently. "You left everything behind when you fled your apartment. This is simply making sure you have what you need." Mrs. Castellano excused herself, leaving Adrian and me alone in the enormous suite. I moved to the window, looking out at the darkened grounds, processing the fact that I was now living in a mansion owned by a crime family, under the protection of a man I barely knew, hiding from an ex-husband who was also a corrupt cop. My life had become a nightmare wrapped in luxury, and I couldn't tell which was worse, the nightmare part or the luxury part. "You're safe here," Adrian said, coming to stand beside me at the window. "Marcus can't reach you. The police can't compel you to leave, and my family. They'll accept you because I've claimed you as under my protection." Claimed me. I turned to face him. "Like property?" "Like family," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Because from where I'm standing, it feels like I've traded one cage for another. A nicer cage, certainly, but still a cage. His jaw tightened, something flashing in his eyes that might have been hurt, or anger, or frustration. "You think I'm imprisoning you?" "I think you're making decisions about my life without consulting me, moving me here without asking if this is what I wanted, surrounding me with your people, your security, your family, making it impossible for me to leave without seeming ungrateful. You can leave right now if you want," he said, his voice going cold in a way that made me suddenly aware of the power he usually kept carefully controlled. "I'll have a car take you anywhere you want to go. Your apartment, a hotel, out of the city entirely. Just say the word." The offer hung between us, genuine despite his anger. And the terrible truth was that I didn't want to leave, didn't want to go back to hiding, to fear, to the constant exhaustion of trying to stay one step ahead of Marcus. But accepting Adrian's protection felt like surrendering something essential, some core part of myself that had survived Marcus and the hospital and every other loss I'd endured. "I don't know what I want," I admitted finally, "except to stop being afraid, to sleep without nightmares, to exist without constantly looking over my shoulder." "Then stay," Adrian said, his voice softening. "Not as my prisoner. Not even as my guest. Stay as someone under my family's protection until we figure out a permanent solution to your Marcus problem." "By permanent solution, do you mean?" "I mean whatever it takes to ensure you're safe. Whether that's testifying for internal affairs, witness protection, or something more direct." His eyes held mine. "I won't lie to you, Ava. Marcus is a threat that needs to be neutralized. How that happens is up to you." The implications of something more direct weren't lost on me. Adrian was offering to kill Marcus if I asked, as casually as someone might offer to take out the trash. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, I felt something darker, something uglier. Relief that someone finally took the threat seriously, that someone had the power and willingness to make Marcus stop. "I need to think," I said, pulling away from the window, from Adrian's overwhelming presence, about testimony, about what happens next. But I can't think clearly when I'm this tired. "Sleep then." He moved toward the door. "Tomorrow we'll talk more. Tomorrow you can meet my family, see the estate in daylight, start making actual decisions instead of just reacting to crisis after crisis." He was almost gone when I called his name. "Adrian?" He turned, his hand still on the doorknob. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for all of this. Even if I don't fully understand it, even if I'm not sure I deserve it. Thank you." Something in his expression softened, the cold, dangerous man retreating to reveal someone more human underneath. "You deserve more than this, Ava. More than protection offered because you stitched up a gunshot wound. More than hiding in safe houses and making impossible choices between bad options. Someday, I hope you'll believe that." He left, and I was alone in the enormous suite, surrounded by luxury I'd never be able to afford on my own, protected by a family whose very name inspired fear throughout the city. I should have felt like a prisoner. Should have felt trapped, manipulated, drawn into something dangerous and wrong. Instead, for the first time in years, I felt something dangerously close to hope. I explored the suite more thoroughly, finding thoughtful details everywhere. Herbal tea in the kitchen area, lavender bath salts, books on the nightstand that matched my tastes. Someone, probably Mrs. Castellano at Adrian's direction, had paid attention to the tiny details that made a space feel welcoming rather than just expensive. The bath was exactly what I needed. Hot water and lavender steam easing the tension from muscles that had been locked tight for so long, I'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. I let myself soak until the water cooled, trying not to think about testimony or Marcus, or the fact that I was now living in a crime boss's family estate. Sleep came surprisingly easily. The bed as soft as it looked, the silence of the countryside so different from my apartment's constant noise. I dreamed, but for once they weren't nightmares, just fragments of memory mixed with present reality. Adrian's gray eyes, and Marcus's fists, and Detective Morrison's business card, all swirling together in ways that made no logical sense. I woke to sunlight streaming through the French doors, birds singing in the gardens below, and the smell of coffee drifting from somewhere nearby. For several confused moments, I couldn't remember where I was. Then reality crashed back, and I sat up too quickly, my heart racing. A soft knock at the door announced Mrs. Castellano with a breakfast tray. "Mr. Adrian thought you might prefer to eat privately this morning. The family can be overwhelming at first meeting." I accepted the tray gratefully. Fresh fruit, toast, eggs cooked exactly how I preferred them, though I'd never told anyone my preferences. Coffee with just a splash of cream. Orange juice freshly squeezed, judging by the pulp. "How did he know?" I asked, gesturing at the perfect breakfast. Mrs. Castellano's smile was knowing. "Mr. Adrian is very observant when he chooses to be. And he's chosen to be very observant where you're concerned, Miss Reyes." After she left, I ate slowly, watching the gardens come into focus in the morning light. They were extensive, carefully maintained, with paths that wound through flower beds and what looked like a small maze of hedges. Beyond the gardens, I could see the edge of a forest, dark trees that formed a natural barrier between the estate and the outside world. My phone, which I'd left on the nightstand, showed more texts from Marcus. I'd stopped reading them, stopped letting his words poison my moments of peace. But the frequency was escalating. 10 messages overnight, each one more desperate and angry than the last. Detective Morrison had also texted, "Need your decisions soon. Evidence window closing." 2 messages, 2 different paths forward, both terrifying in their own ways. A different knock at the door, firmer than Mrs. Castellanos. I opened it to find a young woman around my age, with dark hair and Adrian's gray eyes, studying me with open curiosity. "So you're the mysterious nurse," she said without preamble. "I'm Elena, Adrian's sister. He's been annoyingly cryptic about you, which naturally makes me intensely curious." Despite everything, I found myself smiling. "Ava," I introduced myself, "and I'm not mysterious, just complicated." "Complicated is the Rossetti specialty," Elena said, inviting herself into my suite with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up in this house. "Adrian said you might need a friend, someone who's not a terrifying older brother or part of the security apparatus." "He sent you to babysit me?" "He suggested I might want to meet you. What I do with that suggestion is entirely my choice." She flopped onto the sitting room couch with casual grace. "So, abusive ex-husband who's a cop, internal affairs investigation, hiding in my family's home while Adrian makes ominous plans about neutralizing threats. Did I miss anything?" Her directness was refreshing, shocking after so many weeks of careful words and hidden meanings. "That's pretty much it," I admitted. "Though you make it sound almost manageable when you say it that way." "Nothing about the situation is manageable, which is probably why Adrian's involved. He's terrible at leaving problems alone, especially problems involving people he's decided to care about." Elena studied me with those sharp gray eyes. "And he's decided to care about you, Ava. I haven't seen him this focused on another person's welfare since our mother got sick." The revelation made something twist in my chest. He barely knows me. He knows you helped him when you didn't have to, knows you've been hurt and are still fighting. That's enough for Adrian. Once he decides someone is worth protecting, he's absolutely relentless about it. We talked for over an hour, Elena drawing out my story with a combination of genuine interest and tactical questioning that made me wonder if interrogation skills ran in the family. But unlike Marcus's aggressive questioning or Detective Morrison's professional probing, Elena's curiosity felt like actual care, actual interest in me as a person rather than as a piece in some larger game. "You should testify," she said finally, after I'd explained Detective Morrison's offer. "Not because it's safe, because it's definitely not, but because you'll never really be free of Marcus until he faces consequences. And if Adrian's offering his protection while you do it, that's the best chance you'll ever have." "Your brother can't protect me from everything," I argued. "If Marcus has friends in the department, if they decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth, then they'll learn what happens when you threaten someone under Rossetti protection." Elena's smile was sharp, dangerous, a glimpse of the family steel beneath her friendly exterior. "My brother doesn't make idle promises, Ava. If he says you're safe here, you are. The only question is whether you trust that enough to take the risk." Trust. That impossible luxury I couldn't afford. But as I looked at Elena, at her open expression and her obvious belief in her brother's power, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe trust wasn't something you earned through certainty. Maybe it was something you chose, despite uncertainty, because the alternative was staying frozen in fear forever. "Okay," I heard myself say. "I'll do it. I'll testify." Elena's smile was brilliant, victorious. "Good. Adrian will be relieved. He's been pacing like a caged animal since you arrived, trying to figure out how to convince you without pressuring you." "He's been pacing?" "For hours. It's very entertaining. My brother is not accustomed to caring what other people think or do. You've thoroughly disrupted his carefully controlled world, Ava. I approve." She left shortly after, promising to return later for dinner where I'd meet the rest of the family. "Fair warning," she called from the doorway. "My parents are intense, and Marco is going through a phase where he thinks intimidation is charming. Don't let them overwhelm you." Alone again, I pulled out Detective Morrison's card and my phone, staring at them while my heart raced with equal parts fear and determination. One phone call, one decision, and my life would change irrevocably, for better or worse. I dialed before I could change my mind. Detective Morrison, this is Ava Reyes. I've made my decision. I'll testify. Detective Morrison arrived at the estate the following morning, her professional composure only slightly ruffled by the armed security guards who flanked her from the gate to the main house. I watched from my balcony as Adrian met her at the entrance, their body language suggesting a conversation that was cordial but wary, two predators acknowledging each other's territory. I'd spent the night after making my decision alternating between relief and terror, my mind playing out every possible scenario from Marcus's arrest to my own mysterious disappearance if things went wrong. Elena had stayed with me through dinner, introducing me to her parents, Dominic and Sophia Rossetti, who had examined me with the same calculating intensity their son possessed. They'd asked no questions about my presence, simply accepted Adrian's explanation that I was under family protection, and treated me with a courtesy that somehow felt more binding than any explicit promise. "This is your choice," Adrian had reminded me before leaving my suite last night. "If you change your mind, we find another way." But I hadn't changed my mind. For the first time in years, I was choosing to fight instead of run, and the decision felt terrifyingly right. Now, watching Detective Morrison's determined stride as she entered the house, I understood there was no going back. Whatever happened next would reshape my life completely, burning away the woman I'd been and revealing whatever emerged from the ashes. Mrs. Castellano knocked softly. "Miss Reyes? Detective Morrison is in the library. Mr. Adrian asks if you're ready." Ready. Such a simple word for such a monumental question. "Yes," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm ready." The library was exactly what I'd expect from a family like the Rossettis. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, comfortable chairs arranged before a massive fireplace, and the kind of quiet that made you want to whisper. Detective Morrison sat in one of the chairs, a recorder and several files spread on the table beside her. Adrian stood by the window, his posture relaxed, but his attention completely focused. "Ms. Reyes." Detective Morrison greeted me, standing. "Thank you for agreeing to this. I know it's not easy." "Nothing about this situation has been easy," I replied, taking the chair across from her. "But it's time Marcus faced consequences for his actions." What followed was 3 hours of the most difficult conversation I'd ever had. Detective Morrison walked me through everything systematically: the escalation of violence during my marriage, the specific incidents I could remember with dates and details, the times I'd called for help and been dismissed by Marcus's friends in the department. She asked for medical records I didn't have, documentation I'd been too afraid to create, evidence that had faded with bruises and broken bones that healed. "Your testimony alone might not be enough," she admitted, after I'd exhausted my memory. "We need corroboration, other witnesses, something concrete that ties Marcus to a pattern of abuse and the departmental culture that protected him." "I have something," Adrian said from his position by the window. He'd remained silent throughout my testimony, but now he moved to the table, pulling out his phone. Security footage from the parking lot where Marcus attempted to meet Ava 3 nights ago. Clearly shows him waiting for her, his behavior when she didn't arrive, the threatening texts he sent afterward. Detective Morrison's eyes sharpened. "You've been surveilling Officer Chen?" "I've been protecting Ava," Adrian corrected smoothly. "Marcus's actions while under observation are simply a consequence of that protection. This footage would be inadmissible in court without a warrant." "But it would give you probable cause to obtain that warrant, wouldn't it?" They stared at each other, engaged in a negotiation I only partially understood. Detective Morrison wanted Marcus, wanted the corruption case she was building. Adrian wanted me protected, wanted the threat neutralized. And somehow I'd become the fulcrum on which both their agendas balanced. There's more, Adrian continued. Financial records showing payments from Marcus to several of his colleagues, coinciding with times when Ava called for help and the calls were mishandled. Phone records showing the coordination between officers. Enough evidence to suggest a deliberate pattern of protection and cover-up. How did you obtain these records? Detective Morrison asked, though her tone suggested she didn't really want to know. I have resources, and an interest in ensuring Ava's safety, which requires understanding the full scope of the threat she faces. The detective studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Send me everything. We'll pursue warrants for the financial and phone records through proper channels. Use your surveillance as background for probable cause. But Mr. Rossetti, this makes you a witness in a criminal investigation. You understand what that means? I understand perfectly. Adrian's smile was cold. And I'm prepared to testify if necessary. Some threats are worth eliminating properly, through legal channels, with the full weight of the justice system behind them. They discussed logistics after that, timelines and court dates and the mechanics of building a case strong enough to overcome Marcus's connections. I listened with only half my attention, the rest focused on processing what Adrian had just revealed. He'd been collecting evidence against Marcus for days, building a case, preparing to use his considerable resources to ensure my ex-husband faced consequences. He'd been planning this since the moment I'd told him Marcus's name. Detective Morrison left an hour later, a flash drive of evidence in her possession, and a promise to move quickly. Officer Chen will be formally suspended pending investigation within 48 hours, she said as she was leaving. After that, things will move fast. Are you prepared for what comes next? I thought about Marcus's rage when he learned I'd testified, the escalation that would inevitably follow. Thought about court appearances and cross-examinations, and having every detail of my worst moments exposed to public scrutiny. Thought about the target this would paint on my back, making me a symbol of everything Marcus's colleagues had worked to keep hidden. I'm prepared, I said, and meant it. After the detective left, Adrian and I stood alone in the library, the weight of what we'd set in motion hanging between us. You've been planning this, I said. Not an accusation, just an observation. Since I told you about Marcus, you've been building a case against him. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to make the decision to testify on your own, without feeling obligated by the work I'd already done, without feeling like you had to go through with it because I'd invested resources. He moved closer, close enough that I could see the faint shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd been sleeping as poorly as I had. Your choice had to be yours, Ava, not influenced by gratitude or obligation or fear of disappointing me. And now we prepare for Marcus's response. Now we make sure you're protected through every step of this process. And now, he paused, something shifting in his expression. Now you decide what comes next for us. Us. That word again, taking on new weight with every repetition. Adrian, I don't even know what us means. You're the son of a crime family. I'm a former nurse with a violent ex-husband and a destroyed career. We come from completely different worlds. We come from the same world, he corrected quietly. The world of people trying to survive, trying to protect what matters, trying to make choices that don't cost us our souls. Your world just happened to involve hospital politics, and my world happened to involve family business. But the fundamentals are the same. I wanted to argue, to insist that there was a difference between reporting a negligent surgeon and whatever Adrian did in his family's business. But was there? Really? We'd both made choices that cost us. Both tried to do the right thing in systems that punished righteousness. Both ended up alone and vulnerable in different ways. I don't know what I can offer you, I admitted. I'm broken, Adrian. Marcus broke me. The hospital broke me. This whole situation has broken me into so many pieces I'm not sure I can be put back together. Then don't be put back together. He reached out, his fingers gentle as they traced the nearly faded bruise on my wrist. Be something new instead. Something that doesn't break, that doesn't apologize for existing, that doesn't hide scars like there's something to be ashamed of. That's easy to say, harder to do. Everything worth doing is hard. His hand moved to cup my face, tilting my chin up so I had to meet his eyes. And you're worth the difficulty, Ava. Every complicated, traumatized, fierce part of you is worth it. He kissed me then, soft and questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned into it, into him, into this impossible connection that made no logical sense, but felt more real than anything else in my life right now. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against mine. Whatever comes next, whatever Marcus does, or the investigation requires, or my family needs, you're not alone anymore. You understand that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Say it, he insisted. I need to hear you say it. I'm not alone, I whispered. Not anymore. The next 48 hours passed in a strange limbo of waiting. Marcus was formally suspended, his badge and weapon confiscated, his movements restricted pending investigation. I knew this only because Detective Morrison called to update me, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that suggested things were progressing even better than expected. His colleagues are starting to turn, she explained. The ones who aren't implicated are eager to distance themselves. We're getting testimony about the culture of protection, about specific instances where complaints against Chen were deliberately mishandled. Your testimony is the linchpin, but it's becoming part of something larger. Larger. A systemic investigation into corruption at Precinct 12. Everything Marcus had been terrified would happen, happening because I'd finally chosen to speak instead of hide. Elena kept me company during the day, showing me around the estate, introducing me to the security team, making sure I understood that the protection surrounding me was comprehensive and professional. Adrian doesn't do anything halfway, she explained as we walked through the gardens. When he commits to protecting someone, it's absolute. Is that supposed to be comforting or concerning? Both, she admitted with a smile. My brother is intense in everything he does. But he's also loyal beyond reason once he decides you're worth it. You're worth it to him, Ava. Whether you're ready to accept that or not. At night, Adrian would join me in the library or the gardens, and we'd talk about everything except the investigation, the danger, the impossible situation we were in. He told me about growing up in this family, about learning to balance legitimate business with the other aspects of his father's empire, about his sister's determination to go to law school, and his brother's struggle to find his place. And I told him about my parents, about the loss that had shaped me, about the dreams I'd had before they'd been systematically destroyed by Marcus and the hospital and circumstance. You could go back to nursing, he said one night as we sat on my balcony, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Once this is over, my family has connections to several hospitals. Your record could be reconsidered. That's corruption, I pointed out, using influence to override legitimate decisions. Is it? Or is it correcting an injustice, giving someone a second chance they deserve? He took my hand, his thumb tracing patterns on my palm. Not everything my family does is bad, Ava. Sometimes we use our power to actually help people who've been failed by the systems that are supposed to protect them. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to accept that maybe, just maybe, there could be a path forward that didn't require me to sacrifice everything I'd once believed in. But trust was still hard, still felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and hoping someone would catch me if I jumped. On the third day, Marcus called. Not my phone, which I'd turned off, but the estate's main line, somehow convincing the switchboard he was calling on official police business. Mrs. Castellano brought me the message with visible disapproval. Officer Chen insists he needs to speak with you. I told him you weren't available, but he says it's urgent. It's not urgent, I said. It's harassment. Please tell security not to put through any more calls from him. But Marcus didn't give up so easily. The text started again, dozens of them, his tone escalating from pleading to angry to threatening. You're making a mistake. They're lying to you about me. I can explain everything if you just talk to me. You're going to destroy my career over nothing. This is all Rossetti's doing. He's manipulating you. You'll regret this, you'll regret this, you'll regret this. The repetition was more unnerving than any specific threat. I showed the messages to Adrian, who studied them with a clinical detachment that suggested he was cataloging information rather than reacting emotionally. He's spiraling, Adrian observed, losing control. That makes him more dangerous in the short term, but also more likely to make mistakes. You sound like you've dealt with this before. I've dealt with desperate men who feel cornered. They either collapse or lash out violently. We need to be prepared for either possibility. That night, Detective Morrison called again. We're ready to make arrests. Marcus first, then 3 of his colleagues who we have evidence deliberately mishandled your complaints. It'll happen tomorrow morning. Coordinated raids at their homes. I wanted you to know so you're not caught off guard. Arrests. The word felt surreal, like something that happened in TV shows rather than real life. But this was real life, my real life. And tomorrow the man who'd terrorized me for years would finally face consequences. Thank you, I managed. For believing me. For doing this. Thank you for having the courage to speak up, she replied. You're not just helping yourself, Ava. You're helping every other woman who might have become his victim if we hadn't stopped him. I couldn't sleep that night, kept awake by anticipation and residual fear, and something that might have been hope. Around midnight, I gave up trying and went downstairs, following the sound of quiet music to the library where I found Adrian at his desk, working through papers by lamplight. Can't sleep? He asked without looking up. Too much in my head. I moved to the window, looking out at the darkened grounds. Tomorrow changes everything. Tomorrow changes some things, he corrected, setting down his pen. But not everything that matters. What matters? He stood, crossing to me with that fluid grace that still made my breath catch despite everything. You matter. Your safety matters. The fact that you chose to fight instead of run matters. Everything else is just logistics. Just logistics, I repeated, almost laughing. Arrests and testimony and a man who wants to kill me. Just logistics. Yes. His hands settled on my shoulders, warm and grounding. Because logistics can be managed, problems can be solved, threats can be eliminated. But you, Ava Reyes, you're irreplaceable. That's what matters. I turned in his hold, looking up at him, seeing in his expression the same intensity that had frightened me the first night I'd stitched his shoulder. But now it didn't frighten me. Now it felt like being seen, really seen, for the first time in years. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. How to let someone care about me without waiting for the other shoe to drop, for it all to turn violent, or disappear, or reveal itself as manipulation. You learn, he said simply. Day by day, moment by moment. You let me prove that I mean what I say, that when I promise protection, I deliver it, that when I say you matter, I follow through with actions, not just words. And if I can't learn, if I'm too broken to trust anyone ever again, then I'll be patient. I'll wait. I'll prove it over and over until maybe, eventually, it starts to sink in that some people actually mean it when they say they care. His hands moved to cradle my face. I'm not Marcus, Ava. I'm not the hospital administrators who destroyed your career. I'm not anyone who's ever let you down. I'm someone who sees what you are and wants to protect it, not because I own you, but because the world needs more people who help strangers bleeding on library floors. He kissed me again, deeper this time, with an intensity that made my knees weak. And I let myself fall into it. Let myself believe for just this moment that maybe, there could be something after survival. Something better than just hiding and healing and hoping not to get hurt again. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian held me close, and I let myself lean against him. Let myself accept comfort I didn't think I deserved. "Stay with me tonight," he said quietly, not for anything except not being alone. Because tomorrow is going to be hard, and sometimes being alone makes hard things impossible. I should have said no, should have maintained boundaries, protected myself, kept some distance between us. But I was so tired of being alone, so exhausted from always being strong, that the offer of simple companionship felt more tempting than any luxury he'd provided. "Okay," I whispered. "Tonight, I'll stay." We spent the night in the library, talking and not talking, falling asleep eventually on the large sofa with me curled against his chest and his arms wrapped protectively around me. No expectations, no pressure, just two damaged people finding comfort in not facing the darkness alone. I woke at dawn to find him watching me, his expression soft in the early light. "Today Marcus gets arrested," I said, the reality settling over me like a weighted blanket. "Today Marcus faces consequences," Adrian corrected. "And you take the first real step toward being free." He was right. Today wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of testimony and trials and every painful detail of my marriage being exposed to scrutiny. The beginning of living openly instead of hiding. Of fighting instead of running. Of trusting that maybe, just maybe, I deserved protection and care. And someone who wouldn't hurt me. My phone buzzed with a message from Detective Morrison. "Arrests underway. Chen in custody. You did this, Ava. You made this happen." I showed it to Adrian, who smiled with genuine warmth. "See? You did this. Not me, not my resources, not my family's influence. You chose to speak up, to fight back, to refuse to be a victim anymore. Everything else was just supporting that choice." For the first time in years, possibly ever, I felt something close to pride. Not in what had happened to me, but in how I'd chosen to respond. In the fact that I'd survived, had stitched a stranger's gunshot wound at 2 a.m, had accepted help when I needed it, and had finally chosen to stop running. "What happens now?" I asked, looking up at Adrian. "After the trials, after Marcus is convicted, after this is all over, what happens to us?" "Whatever we choose," he said simply. "You rebuild your nursing career, I continue running my family's business, and we figure out how to exist in the same space without either of us losing who we are. No cages, no possession, just two people who decided the other was worth the complicated work of actually caring." "That sounds terrifying." "It does," he agreed. "But you've survived far worse than trying to trust someone, Ava. And I think you'll find that having someone in your corner, really in your corner, makes even the terrifying things more manageable." I leaned up and kissed him, soft and grateful and full of hope I'd thought I'd lost forever. And when I pulled back, I saw my own hope reflected in his eyes, saw the same cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, we'd both found exactly what we needed in the most unlikely place. "Okay," I said. "Let's figure it out. Day by day, moment by moment. Together." "Together," Adrian agreed, and sealed the promise with another kiss as the sun rose over the estate, burning away the darkness and revealing something new, Something better. Something that felt dangerously close to a future worth fighting for.